Welcome to this episode of Early Detect Studios. Today, we are delighted to feature Brittany Gerald-Lewis, a clinical research professional with over 15 years of global clinical operations experience. Brittany is currently an innovative thought leader and a senior manager for clinical trial diversity and inclusion with one of the premier and cutting-edge pharmaceutical companies. As a fun fact, she is a Wake Forest graduate, and not only is Brittany passionate about clinical trial diversity, but she's also an entrepreneur, building innovative digital health solutions for maternal health and clinical trials. Welcome, Brittany. We're so delighted to have you today.
Thank you, Sheena. I'm very excited to be here.
Wonderful. So before we delve into the conversation about how you are championing diversity in clinical trials and simultaneously an incredible advocate for maternal health outcomes, I'd love to learn more about what specifically inspired you to join this field.
Yeah, so I started in clinical research right out of college, and I was a clinical research associate. So these are the people that go to different sites that are conducting the clinical trials and just making sure they're following the protocol, just all the rules and regulations are being followed for the site. And as I'm traveling around the country, I'm seeing all the investigators look the same, and the patient population also looked the same. It was majority white males. Around maybe 40 to 65. It wasn't a lot of diversity. And that hit me personally because my father actually suffers from a number of health conditions, diabetes, high blood pressure. He's had a number of strokes. And so for me, he's on a lot of medications. And so I'm saying, okay, he's on these medications, but are we really showing that these medications have been tested and work for everyone? So from an early part of my career, I saw that there wasn't representation. And so I've really been passionate about really pushing for that.
Wow, that's so wonderful to hear that you've taken your what you've seen personally and created that into a passion, and now that's your profession. So that's really wonderful. So as a clinical diversity champion, what would you say are your top priorities for the work that you lead?
Yeah, so a big thing we have different focus. So I would say like community, healthcare physicians and the patients. So, engaging with the community, letting everyone know what a clinical trial is, why it's important, and also liaising with these communities that are already present. Because again, we don't want to be transactional. Don't want to say, hey, we just want to be here for a trial. Like, no, we want to really support your healthcare, making sure your health is a priority. So really focusing on that community engagement. With the healthcare and the investigators, really working with doctors who maybe never even thought about being an investigator in a clinical trial. Because again, the more diversity you have in the investigators, that helps bridge down to the patients. And then, of course, really just to the patients, making sure that they know, we're not testing this drug just because like we're trying to further medicine, have maybe better options, something that's less burdensome. Maybe instead of taking, an infusion or an injection, you can take a pill. So we're really looking at it to really improve medicine, which is really improving healthcare. So I was really focused on the overall benefit and then how we can really, take actionable steps towards that.
That's interesting. And more along those lines, I would love to hear about the strategies in particular that you believe are effective in overcoming cultural and socioeconomic barriers, ensuring that diverse communities are actively engaged and represented in clinical trials.
Yeah, and this is huge for every company, right? We want to engage participants we've never talked to before. So the biggest thing is, well, why? Because everyone asks, well, why aren't more people in clinical trials? We see overwhelmingly, a big, huge case we see is in breast cancer for Black women. They simply just aren't even asked to be in a clinical trial. There's this inherent bias, which we know is going on in healthcare, where they just assume certain patients aren't going to be compliant or they're not going to be able to, really just want to be involved. So I think the biggest thing is really making sure we give people the opportunity and the access to be in a trial. So that comes back to companies is really making sure, hey, are we speaking to everyone or are we only using the channels we've used before? So once we open up that access and opportunity, that's really the first step because people aren't participating because they don't want to, aren't even given the opportunity.
Yeah, that's a very insightful point. And I think starting with that foundational principle, a lot can be done if we can accept that foundational principle.
Exactly.
And we should. So given your decade plus experience as a leader in this very important field, how do you think pharma companies should be addressing the impact of limited diversity in clinical trials on our understanding of vaccine safety and efficacy? So what steps are taken to enhance inclusivity in this regard?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing, unlike most of what we do in pharma, we're not competitive in terms of diversity, right? We're competitive with our medicines and our IP, but, diversity and health equity helps everyone. So it's really looking at what can we do to help everyone. So a lot of times we see, vaccine trials Very low burden in terms of participant. They get one or maybe two injections, and then there's a follow up. It's not a heavy burden on them. It's not a heavy lift. It's easier to be more inclusive and get more diverse participants in that aspect. When you're on chronic disease trials, let's say it's diabetes or high cholesterol or even oncology, that's a little bit more challenging because then you're working along the diagnostic journey. We see a lot of challenges with oncology diversity because if you have to know, let's say, your biomarkers for your tumor, or you have to have had been on certain medications, everyone doesn't have that same access. So then we're inherently excluding people just because of the nature of healthcare. So really understanding like healthcare as a practice and how people are being diagnosed and treated, then we can really open it up to be inclusive. Because if we're only looking at people that are just following the traditional journey, that may be, ruling out large populations. So really us understanding what it looks like of the healthcare journey and making sure our protocols reflect that as well. We can't have these just copy and paste protocols we've been using for the past couple of years and expecting it to be more inclusive. So it's really taking a look at our practices as a pharma company when we're writing our protocols and doing the clinical trial journey, but also making sure it aligns with what's actually going on in healthcare and does it actually make sense for them to come together.
Got it. That makes sense. It seems like there needs to be a holistic approach in considering all these parts and pieces. So switching gears just a little bit, with the advancement of technology and data analytics and AI ML, we're hearing all these buzzwords, of course. And, I was curious from your perspective, given what you do is so important to outcomes, do you believe there are ways in which, AI technologies, data science technologies can improve diversity in clinical trials? And think about it from everything from participant recruitment to data analysis and helping to ensure equitable health outcomes for all. I would just love to understand where you believe the future of this field will interact with your profession.
Yes, that's like the big buzzword, AI. And I've been hearing about AI in healthcare for like 10 years, right? Like, and what's going on? I think back to this a lot because I remember there was IBM Watson and IBM Watson Health. And Watson Health ended up not really doing so well. They had a use case with MD Anderson Cancer Center where they're supposed to help really revolutionize, cancer research and care, and something didn't quite work, right? So we always have to understand that technology is great, but what is it actually doing? What is it actually looking at? We get a lot of companies that come to us and say, "Hey, we can help identify patients that have this type of cancer." And that's really nice. Two issues I always go back and say, well, what's the source of your data? Because if you only have access to, let's say, just Epic, medical records, well, every hospital or doctor's office doesn't use Epic, so you're kind of already limiting yourself to communities that maybe use something different, and so that's kind of inherently biased. And then also, well, what about someone that maybe doesn't go to the physician that has all these records? If we're looking at oncologists, but someone maybe only goes to maybe a community doctor because they don't have the insurance, you're also kind of missing out on that as well. So I think
Right.
when we're, looking at data, we're gonna have to look at the quality of the data and kind of the source of the data. Where I think AI could maybe really help short term until we kind of get to a better place where overall healthcare data is better, is really looking at supporting our sites. So let's say we do want to get more diversity, more investigators, more sites, more participants, right? It's not
Right.
just getting them enrolled in the trial, it's keeping them enrolled in the trial. And so I think something important would be really able to kind of forecast or understand what patients may be at risk of attrition. And so we can help support that. So if we have a site, let's say this site's first time doing research, we might want to have a little bit more eyes on them, more hands on them to help them navigate the protocol during a trial. Same thing if this is participants first time doing a trial. They may not really understand the importance of maybe doing the diaries or making sure they're, compliant with their medication if they go out of town. So I think that's where we can really kind of support is if we kind of look at the data that we have as a pharma, especially in our trials, and say, hey, you know what? We've tagged these sites that are maybe new to research, or this site has a really large enrollment. We may need to really help them in, conducting this trial. I think that's where the importance is because we know that quality of data. I think that's kind of where we can start is really supporting the retention of the
Mhm.
participants that we have and really kind of going from there. But I think it's definitely hard in healthcare just because we have so many disparate systems and it's just not all, one size fits all. And so I think that's the biggest piece that I try to get people to understand is like, let's really focus on what we can really achieve, like the low hanging fruit, and then kind of
Right.
expand from.
Yeah, I think you're onto something there. I think there could be significant improvements if we could use these technologies in those particular contexts. And I'm very excited to see the future of that in your field.
Yes.
So switching gears again, just a little bit. I also know that you are an incredible maternal health innovation champion. And I know that's in the context that we first met.
Yeah.
Having developed your own app to help individuals understand whether they are potentially at risk for 10 maternal health conditions in particular. And I know that you're also, a avid lactation support champion as well. And you've done some digital innovation in that space. I'd love to hear more about this area of your passion, as well as the nexus between your passion for maternal health and your role in championing diversity in clinical trials. I was curious to know if there was any bridge between these two.
Yes, and it all started. I had my daughter 4.5 years ago, and I struggle with breastfeeding. And to me, I'm just like, well, the things that people think why people struggle with or don't have access to, I didn't have that problem. I had great family support system, great healthcare benefits, access to lactation specialists, but I still struggled.
Mhm.
And really doing my own research, I kind of saw, the advice I was given was kind of one size fits all and didn't really help, but it also didn't take account my whole journey
Right.
of why I struggled. And then so it kind of goes along even with maternal health. Like, why do we have this huge maternal health crisis in the U.S., especially amongst Black women? Like, people think like, wait, we have some of the best healthcare in the world. What's going on? But when you kind of dig into it, there's so many different reasons why. And I wanted to address that. Like, that's a big thing for me. It always breaks my heart, even from, Serena Williams, you
Right.
had people, Allison Felix, you have, Olympic winning champions
Yeah.
women that all had challenges in their pregnancy and childbirth. And the common denominators are Black women in the US. And that shouldn't be the case. So that's kind of always been a passion for mine because it just doesn't make sense, when we think about healthcare and access. And how I've also kind of tied it into clinical trial and the diversity aspect is so with my health app, so it's my postpartum navigation with the app, is basically taking kind of what we do in clinical research and looking at side effects and kind
Mhm.
of doing that to advocate for the mother. So whenever you're in a clinical trial, we call adverse events, which are side effects. We want to capture those. So we capture, what happened, when did it start, maybe when did it conclude, how long it lasted, and did you take any medicine or any kind of treatment for that. And that's kind of the main things we capture in a clinical trial to see, okay, how's the medicine working, are there any safety or efficacy concerns. And so
Mhm.
taking that same approach, I'm doing that for the postpartum mother, so she'll be able to
Right.
kind of go in and record her symptoms. Maybe she wakes up and maybe she has tightness in the chest, so we'll ask her, okay, what is the event, how long did it last, when did it start, the severity, things like that. And then on the back end, it's matching with symptoms of like the top 10 postpartum health complications. So that way it can alert them like, hey, you may be experiencing this. And
Right.
how that helps is because we know now women will just go to the healthcare provider, I don't feel well. And they're just dismissed because not feeling well doesn't really translate to a healthcare provider. But
Right.
if you go in, hey, I'm not feeling well, my blood pressure's been X, Y, and Z over the past days. I'm also having, tightness in the chest or swelling in the legs. Those are actionable things that can be addressed. And so the whole purpose of the app is really being an advocate for the postpartum mother, but also letting them know this is kind of what you should be looking at in your journey. Because to be honest, I remember being discharged from the hospital and I don't know if they told me anything about myself. I don't remember because I'm sleep deprived and it's all about
Right.
the baby. So it's also kind of just helping the mother really kind of focus back on their health, but having someone assist and assess the journey and the symptoms and be able to point out to them where, hey, you could be experiencing this type of complication, reach out to a healthcare provider and provide them with your past symptoms.
Very interesting. I think it's really beautiful to see how both your journey as a clinical diversity champion in trials and then also in maternal health have a nexus, and that is inclusivity and making sure that everybody's included in care, the care journeys, and that the care journeys, consider everybody when they're designed. And I think that's really remarkable and incredible, Brittany. I just wanted to ask if you have any last words before we conclude today.
Yeah, no, I mean, this has been amazing. I love talking about child diversity. I love talking about, maternal health and even more so just the innovations around that. We
Yeah.
do know healthcare seems to lag a little bit in getting the latest and greatest technology. And not because it's not needed or adopted, it's because, a lot of times we're getting outside people telling us what we should do as opposed to us working together. So I just want to let everyone know, if you're interested in child diversity, maternal health, any kind of innovation, it's definitely going to be a collaborative effort with everyone,
100%.
and it can't just be one company does one thing. So that's the biggest lesson that I've seen and try to do is make sure that I am seeing what other companies are doing and try to collaborate and just working across the board, because it's not going to be one person that solves healthcare or maternal health crisis or child diversity. It's everyone all together.
100% collaboration is key. I totally agree with you on that. So thank you so much, Brittany, for joining us on the podcast. Your thoughts have given our audience so much to think about as it relates to the importance of representation and strategies going into ensuring the recruitment and retention of diverse populations representative of the epidemiology of disease under study. I really appreciate your commitment to advancing the conversation and fostering inclusivity in medical research, and of course, for being such a champion for maternal health. Thank you so much, Brittany. And to our audience, until next time, be well.